The story starts with a young girl. She was just another fan. Tonight, the hottest idol group in the country had everyone on their feet. And at the center of it all was Nulchin, the group's dazzling lead vocalist. Like everyone else, she couldn't take her eyes off him. One smile from Nulchin was enough to make the entire crowd scream. But unlike the others, she was having a miserable time. Meanwhile, back at school, the teachers were preparing for a new transfer student. Do-jiyoung was asked to clear an empty seat and keep an eye on the newcomer. The moment he looked at the student's record, he recognized the familiar face immediately. We have to rewind a few days. Late one evening, Rai suddenly received an excited message from her friend about a viral fancam from Dimple's latest performance. She rushed to her computer without wasting a second, eager to see what everyone was talking about. The fancam had been uploaded. Watching Nulchin smile straight into the camera made Rai wish she could see him in person. She finally made up her mind. This weekend, she was going to the pre-recording no matter what. While Rai was still on phone, someone suddenly caught her red-handed. One look at her was enough for him to guess she was planning to chase after Dimple once again. He couldn't help reminding her that the last time she went to one of their events, she came home completely exhausted and even got sick. But according to him, she clearly hadn't learned her lesson. Embarrassed that she'd been caught, Rai quickly tried to play it off, asking when he'd even walked into her room. The moment he kept teasing her, she grabbed the nearest pillow and threw it straight at him, yelling for him to get out while she was still in her pajamas. Instead of taking the hint, he laughed and teased her even more, joking that she could follow Nulchin everywhere she wanted, but the idol probably didn't even know her name. He casually told her that dinner was ready before dragging her downstairs, while Rai stubbornly resisted the entire way. All while this Miso was still on call. She asked to make sure Rai was still going to the next day, Rai and Miso finally arrived at Dimple's fan-signing event. Although Nulchin was sitting right in front of her, Rai felt surprisingly calm. Her heart wasn't racing, her hands weren't shaking, and she didn't react like the other fans at all. But then, the moment Nulchin looked at her, he smiled and casually called her by name. Rai was completely caught off guard. She had never introduced herself, so how could he possibly know who she was? Before she could even process what had happened, the fans nearby started whispering among themselves. One girl suddenly recognized Rai and excitedly pointed her out. She wasn't just any fan, she was the person behind Banchan, Dimple's biggest fan page. Her edits had gone so viral that they had introduced thousands of people to Nulchin, making her well known throughout the fandom. As everyone stared at her in amazement, Rai could feel the embarrassment taking over. Unable to handle all the attention, she grabbed Miso and rushed out of the venue without looking back. On the way home, Miso couldn't understand Rai at all. After everything that had happened, Rai admitted that she was the one running Nulchin's biggest fan page. She had spent the past year making edits, posting updates, and growing one of the largest fan communities online. Her phone, planner, and even her scrapbook were filled with Nulchin's photos, stickers, and doodles. To anyone else, she looked like the definition of a diehard fan. But despite all of that, Rai insisted she wasn't actually Nulchin's fan, and Miso had absolutely no idea how that was even possible. The next morning, Miso was still celebrating after they won tickets to Dimple's pre-recording. She happily thanked Rai, calling her lucky charm, while the rest of the class quickly found out about their plans. Some students couldn't understand why anyone would be so obsessed with celebrities, especially with exams coming up. Rai stayed quiet, but then Do-jiyoung joined the conversation and casually claimed that Dimple wasn't even that good-looking. His comment immediately caught everyone's attention. When Miso proudly revealed they had actually won tickets, Do-jiyoung couldn't believe their luck, joking that if they studied with the same dedication, they'd be top students by now. Miso quickly argued back, making the whole class laugh. But as Do-jiyoung walked away, she leaned over to Rai with a teasing smile, convinced that the class president secretly liked her because he always treated her differently from everyone else. Just before class started, Do-jiyoung asked, "Have you turned in your phone?" She could find her phone. She immediately bent down to search beneath her desk. Do-jiyoung had walked over. He joked that he was babysitting her again before helping her look. As he leaned across the desk, the distance between them disappeared, leaving Rai completely froze. Everyone in the class was looking at them. Do-jiyoung looked straight into her eyes and broke the awkward silence with a teasing smile. "So, am I better looking than your idol crush?" The unexpected question left Rai speechless. Moments later, he found her missing phone and offered to turn it in for her. But as he glanced at the wallpaper on the back of her phone, covered with Nulchin's picture, his smile faded for just a moment. It was almost as if he felt a little jealous. The moment Rai noticed Dojiang's smile disappear after seeing Nulchin on her phone, she felt strangely satisfied. That was exactly why she had started acting like Nulchin's biggest fan in the first place. If seeing another guy made Dojiang jealous, maybe, just maybe, she'd finally understand how he really felt about her. Holding her Nulchin bottle, Rai quietly smiled to herself. Maybe now I'll finally know what's in your heart, she thought. Her mind drifted back to when they were little. Rai and Dojiang had been classmates ever since elementary school. During one sports festival, Dojiang excitedly ran over and asked if she wanted to play with him. The moment Rai agreed, he happily shouted for the teachers to put her on the blue team. Since he was already assigned to the red team, he ran back to join his teammates. But before the games could even begin, another boy started complaining. He didn't want Rai on his team because everyone believed she was terrible at sports and would only make them lose. Hearing those words in front of everyone completely broke Rai's heart, and she couldn't hold back her tears. The moment Dojiang saw her crying, he immediately stepped in. Even though everyone protested that the red team couldn't afford to lose their best player, Dojiang didn't hesitate for a second. He simply told them he didn't care about winning if it meant leaving Rai to cry alone, and chose to switch to the blue team just to stay by her side. Rai looked at him shocked. Then Dojiang turned and looked back at her. Both of their eyes met. That was the moment Rai fell for him. They both went to play and time passed by and they grew up playing basketball. Rai was in love with him but didn't know how Dojiang felt about her. She came back to reality when someone called her name. When she looked up, it was Nulchin. There were too many students gathered around the class to see Nulchin. All the class was shocked to see the idol as a transfer student in their class. Then the teacher came to the class desk to introduce Nulchin as the new transfer student. Nulchin was standing right beside the teacher. He whispered something in the teacher's ear. Then the teacher said, Rai Kim, as you are a fan of Nulchin, you must help him to settle in. He told Nulchin to sit with Rai. Rai was losing it because her fake crush and real crush were both in this class. The rest of the class started to ask for Nulchin's autograph and talk to him. All were very happy to meet a celebrity in person. Everyone immediately crowded around Nulchin, asking if he could bring them signed albums. With a smile, he promised he'd do his best. Meanwhile, Rai was quietly freaking out. If everyone found out Nulchin wasn't actually her real crush, the lie she'd been hiding for so long would completely fall apart. Then she remembered something Miso had told her once. If you ever meet your idol in person, respect their privacy. Don't act like you already know them. So Rai quickly decided to pretend they were complete strangers. That way, no one would suspect anything. Just as she thought she'd pulled it off, Nulchin suddenly turned to her and asked if she'd like a signed album too. Caught off guard, Rai awkwardly replied, "Don't bother." Hearing that, Nulchin smiled and said, "I guess you're not as big a fan as I thought." Rai's heart instantly dropped. She was terrified he'd exposed the truth in front of the entire class. In a complete panic, she started pulling out everything she owned with his face on it, her bottle, wallet, stickers, scrapbook, and every piece of merchandise she had, frantically trying to prove she really was his biggest fan. Then she quickly explained that she'd only refused because she already had one of his signed albums. Watching her desperately defend herself, Nulchin couldn't help laughing. With a warm smile, he simply looked at her and said, "You're funny." As the day went on, Nulchin gradually started relying on Rai. First, he casually asked her to write the class notes for him since his hands were hurting. A little later, Nulchin mentioned he was thirsty. Rai immediately got up to bring him some water, but just as she returned, he smiled and said he was craving a Coke instead. Not wanting to disappoint him, Rai headed back out to find one, but when she finally came back with the drink, she froze. Several girls had already surrounded Nulchin, bringing him snacks, lunch, and even Coke before she could. Laughing and chatting with them, Nulchin looked completely at ease. Before long, Nulchin had already become the most popular student in the entire school. She sat down next to him in cafeteria and quietly sipped the Coke she'd gone out of her way to get for him. Deep down, she couldn't help complaining to herself. He's so lazy, moody, and treats me like his personal assistant, yet somehow, he always managed to get away with it thanks to that charming smile. When Rai looked up, she noticed Dojiang sitting across the cafeteria. The moment he saw Nulchin and Rai eating together, his expression noticeably darkened. He didn't say a single word, but the jealousy on his face was impossible to miss. By the time school finally ended, Rai was completely drained. It felt like the longest day of her life, and she was practically dragging herself toward the school gate. That's when Miso suddenly ran over and hugged her, completely jealous that Rai got to spend the entire day sitting next to Nulchin. Dojiang happened to overhear the conversation and glanced at Rai before asking why she didn't seem happy about it. Rai immediately panicked. Wait, is he already starting to suspect something? She thought. But before she could come up with an excuse, someone suddenly called out her name from behind, making everyone turn around. It was Nulchin. He walked straight toward her, leaving everyone around them completely stunned. Rai's heart nearly stopped when he admitted there was something he'd been wanting to ask her. Trying to stay calm, she listened as Nulchin explained that he was still new to the school and didn't know his way around yet. Then, with a bright smile, he asked if he could have her phone number. Rai's mind instantly went blank. Instead of giving a normal answer, she babbled something awkwardly. Somehow, she managed to tell him he could contact her anytime. But before the conversation could continue, Dojiang suddenly stepped between them. Seeing how flustered Rai looked, he coldly told Nulchin to back off because she was obviously uncomfortable. Nulchin looked at him in confusion and simply asked, "Who are you?" Then, before anyone could react, Dojiang answered without the slightest hesitation he was Rai's older brother. Rai immediately smacked him, shouting that he obviously wasn't. Embarrassed, Dojiang grabbed her hand and pulled her away with him. Rai's heart wouldn't stop pounding, while Nulchin quietly watched them disappear. Once they were alone, Rai couldn't hold back anymore. She demanded to know why Dojiang had suddenly pretended to be her brother. Instead of answering, Dojiang looked straight at her and said he already knew everything. Then he asked the one question Rai had been avoiding all this time. "The guy you like, it's Nulchin, isn't it?" Those words hit Rai like a truck. She tried to explain herself, but Dojiang gently held her face and told her not to lie. He'd seen everything. He'd watched Nulchin asking her to write notes, buy drinks, run errands, fetch snacks, and even spend her own money on him. From Dojiang's perspective, it looked like Nulchin was taking advantage of a devoted fan. Dojiang couldn't hide how angry he was. He warned Rai that if someone twisted the story online, Nulchin could end up buried in a bullying scandal. One false article, a few viral posts, and everything Nulchin had worked for could disappear overnight. Hearing that, Rai thought if that happened she couldn't see Dojiang jealous again. She stood up and defended Nulchin without thinking. She insisted that everything she'd done was her own choice because that's what being a fan meant to her. Dojiang fell silent. Believing he'd misunderstood everything, saying he'd only stepped in because he thought his friend was being bullied. Then he quietly admitted that maybe he should have minded his own business. Rai tried to explain, but before she could find the right words, Dojiang cut her off. Completely oblivious to the tension, Nulchin cheerfully walked back over to them and asked if they were talking about him. Before Rai could respond, Dojiang looked him straight in the eyes and gave her an impossible choice. "So, choose me or Nulchin." To understand why Dojiang suddenly forced Rai to choose between him and Nulchin, we have to go back a few years. The two of them had been inseparable since childhood. Whether it was walking to school, eating lunch, or heading home after class, they did everything together. Even when Dojiang's friends invited him to hang out, they'd always ask Rai to let him go, because everyone knew he would never leave without her. Staying by Rai's side had become such a natural part of his life that he never even questioned it. But everything changed once they entered middle school. One day, Rai casually told him she was going to a Dimple concert after school. At first, Dojiang didn't think much of it. He figured it was just another hobby that would pass. But he couldn't have been more wrong. From that day on, Rai became completely obsessed with Nulchin. She spent all her free time attending events, watching fancams, running her fan page, and talking about him non-stop. Little by little, she grew busier, while the time she spent with Dojiang kept disappearing. Before he even realized it, the girl who had always been beside him was slowly drifting away. And strangely enough, every single time he heard the name Nulchin, he could feel his blood starting to boil. He didn't understand why it bothered him so much. He only knew that he hated watching Rai choose someone else over him. And that was the real reason Dojiang asked Rai to make a choice, him or Nulchin. Rai immediately confronted Dojiang, demanding to know why he'd suddenly forced her to choose between him and Nulchin. That's when Nulchin finally understood what had been happening all along. It wasn't that Dojiang hated him, he was simply jealous because Rai was the girl he liked. Realizing the misunderstanding, Nulchin quickly apologized and explained that he had only been asking Rai for help because he was new to the school and didn't know how things worked there. He assured Dojian that he never intended to take advantage of her. Nulchin then turned back to Rai with a smile and sincerely apologized for putting her in such an awkward position. Before leaving, he politely reached out his hand for a handshake. Rai happily reached out to shake his hand. But the second Dojian saw their hands touch, his expression instantly changed. The jealousy he had been trying so hard to hide suddenly became impossible to control. The very next day, Nulchin was once again sitting right beside Rai. As soon as class started, he casually asked if she'd finished writing the notes for him. Before Rai could even answer, Nulchin leaned in much closer than expected. Gently brushing a strand of her hair aside, he smiled and said, "Wow, what shampoo do you use? You smell really nice." Rai completely froze, unable to process what had just happened. Dojian witnessed everything. Watching Nulchin get that close to Rai made his blood boil. In his mind, there was no way this was accidental. He was convinced Nulchin was deliberately doing it just to provoke him. Meanwhile, Nulchin couldn't help smiling to himself. Seeing Dojian's reaction made him realize his little tease had worked exactly as planned. That same day, Nulchin approached Rai and asked if she wanted to come with him to an upcoming event. The invitation caught her completely off guard. Almost immediately, Dojian's words came rushing back to her. She had to choose between continuing to fangirl over Nulchin or staying friends with him. Already panicking, Rai tried to turn Nulchin down as politely as possible. She told him not to worry about inviting her because the event was probably meant for his band members and the people close to them. But Nulchin quickly explained that the other members were bringing guests too. He even told her she could bring her own friends, which only made the situation harder. That was when Rai noticed Miso nearby, secretly listening to their conversation. Miso was trying to hide, but her expression made it obvious that she had heard everything. Rai immediately realized she had no way out. If she refused an invitation from Nulchin right in front of Miso, her friend would never let her forget it. And that was when the story went back 1 year, revealing how Rai and Miso first became friends, and how Rai's fake fangirl act began in the first place. Back in middle school, Rai was sitting with 2 classmates when they brought up the school scholarship event happening that Saturday. They asked whether she was planning to attend because her crush, Dojian, would be going on stage to receive an award. The other girl immediately agreed, teasing Rai and saying there was no way she would miss a chance to see him. Rai instantly panicked and denied everything. She insisted that Dojian was not her crush at all. But her classmates were not convinced. They pointed out that Rai and Dojian were always together. They walked to school together, went home together, and seemed almost inseparable. Rai quickly explained that it was only because they had known each other since elementary school and lived nearby. To her, that was the only reason they spent so much time together. Still, the girls continued teasing her. Rai became even more embarrassed at the thought of Dojian hearing those rumors. In a desperate attempt to shut the conversation down, she loudly declared that she did not like him and definitely would not be attending the event on Saturday. But when Saturday finally arrived, Rai secretly showed up anyway. She covered herself carefully so no one would recognize her and even brought a banner to cheer for Dojian. No matter how much she denied liking him, she could not bring herself to miss such an important moment. From the crowd, she watched as Dojian went on stage and successfully received the scholarship. Seeing him standing there under the lights, Rai felt proud, even though she would never admit it out loud. Once the ceremony was nearly over, she decided it was time to leave before anyone noticed her. She quietly tried to sneak away while everyone was still distracted. But just before she could escape, someone suddenly called her name. Rai froze. When she turned around, she saw several students from her class standing there, and Dojian was with them. Completely caught off guard, Rai immediately denied that she had come for the scholarship ceremony. She knew that admitting the truth would only prove every rumor her classmates had been spreading. Then she noticed a nearby poster advertising a performance by a rookie group called Dimple. Without thinking, Rai pointed toward the poster and quickly claimed that she had actually come to see them perform. One of the girls instantly lit up. She rushed over, grabbed Rai's hand, and excitedly revealed that she was also a Dimple fan. She could not believe she had finally found someone else who knew the group. That girl was Miso. And with one desperate lie, Rai not only gained a new best friend, she also accidentally began an entire fake fangirl life that would become much harder to escape than she ever imagined. After that day, Rai and Miso became close friends. During their free time at school, they would sit together and talk about Dimple. One day, Miso asked Rai which member was her favorite, so Rai randomly pointed at the pink-haired member and chose Nulchin. Whenever Rai texted Dojion, he usually replied coldly or took days to answer. But the moment she mentioned Nulchin, he would respond almost immediately. Soon, Rai started using Nulchin as an excuse to keep their conversations going. She did not care what they talked about, she was simply happy that Dojion was finally replying to her. Then one day, while they were still students at Nari Middle School, heavy rain began falling outside. Miso and Rai were leaving school to attend Dimple's concert when Miso noticed Dojion following them. She immediately asked why he was coming along, insisting that they could manage perfectly well on their own. While the two of them were still arguing, Rai appeared behind them, completely distracted as she searched through her bag. Miso and Dojion both turned around and watched as Rai emptied everything onto the ground, desperately looking for her umbrella. But even after checking every item, she still could not find it. Seeing her struggle, Dojion calmly opened his umbrella and told Rai not to worry. His umbrella was large enough for both of them, so they could walk together. Rai and Dojion finally started walking toward the concert together under the same umbrella. Since the rain was heavy, they had no choice but to stay close, while Miso walked beside them. After traveling through the rain, the three of them finally reached the concert venue. The place was already crowded with excited fans waiting to collect their tickets and enter the hall. They joined the long line near the lockers and started preparing their tickets. Miso checked everything carefully, while Rai quietly looked around at the huge crowd surrounding them. While Miso excitedly took photos for her social media, Rai stood beside her, staring at all the fans. She was still getting used to how crowded and overwhelming idol events could be. As Rai looked around, she suddenly noticed a strange man staring directly at her. At first, she tried to ignore him, hoping he would eventually look away on his own. But the man kept moving closer and changing positions just to remain near her. His constant staring made Rai increasingly uncomfortable, though she was too nervous to confront him herself. Dojion quickly noticed what was happening and immediately moved beside Rai. He placed himself between her and the stranger, then stared back at the man with a cold, threatening expression. Without asking Rai anything, Dojion casually placed his arm around her shoulder. He pulled her close so naturally that, to anyone watching, they looked exactly like a protective boyfriend and girlfriend. Rai froze as she found herself pressing against Dojion's chest. Standing that close, she could even smell his familiar scent, making her heart pound harder than the crowded venue ever could. Dojion kept his eyes fixed on the stranger and silently warned him to face forward. His expression made the message clear: keep staring at Rai, and he might personally remove those eyes. At that moment, the stage lights suddenly came on, and all 5 members of Dimple appeared before the audience. As their performance began, the entire venue erupted with excitement. Miso screamed louder than almost everyone around her, completely lost in the moment. Rai soon joined in too, repeatedly calling Nulchin's name and cheering for him with surprising enthusiasm. Standing beside her, Dojion watched in growing irritation, unable to understand why she liked Nulchin so much. By the time the concert ended, it was already dark outside. On their way back, Rai and Miso kept discussing how Dimple looked even more handsome in person than they did on television. After listening to them praise the group non-stop, Dojion finally complained that his ears were tired and told them to stop talking about Dimple. While they were walking, Dojion ran into a few of his friends. They asked where the 3 of them were heading, and he explained that they were on their way to the bus stop. They all boarded the bus, with Rai sitting beside Dojion. Exhausted after the concert, she soon began nodding off, her head repeatedly slipping forward as she struggled to stay awake. Half asleep and confused, Rai suddenly looked around and asked Dojion where they were. Seeing how tired she was, he gently guided her head onto his shoulder and told her to sleep, promising to wake her when they reached home. Rai quietly rested against him and pretended to fall asleep, though she remained fully aware of everything around her. A classmate sitting nearby noticed how close they looked and casually asked Dojiang whether he and Rai were dating. Dojiang immediately denied it, saying he was not dating her and questioning why he ever would. When his friend pointed out that the two of them were always together, Dojiang repeated that there was nothing romantic between them. Still resting on his shoulder, Rai heard every word, and although she kept pretending to sleep, his cold answer quietly hurt her. Dojiang explained that he thought dating was pointless if people were only going to break up eventually. He did not want anyone asking him out or expecting anything romantic from him. Even though many girls had confessed to him over the years, he had rejected every one of them while secretly holding feelings for Rai that he never admitted.